Lady Tamsin Staverton did not bow. On the morning of the 14th April 1856, beneath the painted ceiling of Foxcombe House Seminary in Bath, 12 young ladies bent in perfect unison before a row of patronesses, parents, and titled guests. Tamsin remained upright beside the pianoforte. Her white muslin dress was spotless. Her hands were folded exactly as she had been taught. Only the quick movement beneath her narrow ribs betrayed that she was breathing too fast. At the edge of the exhibition room, Miss Fenella Penrose stood beside a table of botanical drawings and pressed flowers, where her position as drawing mistress placed her close enough to correct a crooked label, but too low to interrupt a public lesson. The French moral verse assigned to Tamsin lay open upon the music stand. She had recited none of it. Mrs. Deborah Quen B., the widowed headmistress, smiled toward the guests with the calm sorrow of a woman inconvenienced by another person's weakness. "Lady Tamsin," she said, "you may begin again." Tamsin stared beyond the room, not at the printed verse, not at the women watching her, and not at the man seated in the front row. Aylmer Staverton, Duke of Whitcomb, had arrived from Wiltshire that morning to witness his daughter's progress. Fenella had never seen him before, except in the small painted miniature kept in Tamsin's school trunk. The miniature had shown a severe young widower with dark eyes and a mouth made for command. The living man looked older, more tired, and far more dangerous to anyone who mistook restraint for softness. His gloved hands rested upon the silver head of his cane. He had not moved since Tamsin failed to speak. "The first line," Deborah prompted. "You know it perfectly." Tamsin's lips parted. No sound came. A murmur passed through the patronesses. One woman whispered that grief had made the child indulged. Another said Foxcombe had worked wonders with more difficult girls. Fenella watched Tamsin's throat tighten. She knew that stillness. It was not defiance. Defiance looked outward. This terror had folded itself inward until the child seemed almost absent from her own body. Deborah crossed the small distance between them. "We cannot allow silence to become a habit." She placed 2 fingers upon Tamsin's shoulder. The child recoiled so sharply that the music stand shook. A folded page slid to the floor. Someone gasped. Deborah's smile did not change. "Lady Tamsin." Fenella spoke before caution could stop her. "It isn't a habit." Every face turned toward her. Deborah removed her hand from the child and looked at Fenella as one might look at an ink stain discovered upon fine linen. Miss Penrose was not invited to comment. "No, ma'am." Fenella kept her voice level. "But Lady Tamsin cannot recite while she is struggling to breathe." Aylmer's gaze moved from his daughter to Fenella. She felt its weight, but did not look toward him for rescue or approval. Tamsin's breath mattered more than whether a duke considered her insolent. Deborah's expression hardened beneath its public gentleness. "You are employed to teach drawing, not to diagnose the manners of young ladies." "I have made no diagnosis." "Then do not make a spectacle of ordinary correction." Fenella lowered her voice. "The spectacle began before I spoke." The room seemed to contract. Aylmer's cane shifted once against the carpet. Deborah turned away from Fenella before the exchange could become a challenge to her authority. "Miss Copley, take Lady Tamsin to the adjoining room until she is ready to behave with composure." A senior instructress stepped forward. Tamsin looked at the woman's approaching hand. Her face went white. Aylmer began to rise, but the child moved first. She crossed the exhibition room without running. She passed the pianoforte, the line of staring pupils, and the chair where her father stood. Then she stopped before Fenella and reached out. Not toward the Duke, not toward Deborah, only toward the drawing mistress whose cuffs were worn and whose left thumb bore a faint stain of green paint. Fenella went down on one knee. She did not open her arms. She did not seize the child's hands. "I'm here," she said. "You don't have to speak." Tamsin's fingers hovered above Fenella's. Fenella kept her palm relaxed and still. "You may touch me if you choose. You may let go whenever you choose." The child placed 2 cold fingers around Fenella's forefinger. Her breathing remained uneven, but the terrible rigidity in her shoulders loosened by a fraction. Aylmer had come fully to his feet. Fenella saw him only when his shadow reached the carpet beside them. His attention was not fixed upon the impropriety of a schoolmistress kneeling before his daughter. He was watching the exact space between Fenella's hand and Tamsin's, as if he had understood that the most important thing in the room was what Fenella had chosen not to do. She had not pulled. She had not claimed. She had waited. "No one will touch her," he said. His voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it. Miss Copley stopped at once. Deborah clasped her hands before her. "Your Grace, the child is distressed. Because Miss Penrose has encouraged an unhealthy dependence." Fenella felt Tamsin's grip tighten. She did not answer. To defend herself while the child listened would turn Tamsin's fear into an argument. Aylmer noticed the silence. His gaze rested on Fenella's face for one searching moment, perhaps expecting gratitude, appeal, or ambition. She gave him none. She watched his daughter's breathing instead. "Lady Tamsin has been at Foxcombe for 7 months, he said. "Miss Penrose has held her hand for less than 1 minute. If dependence has been created here, Mrs. Quenby, I doubt it began with that hand." Deborah's composure thinned. A public exhibition can overwhelm a sensitive child. We must not mistake temporary agitation for evidence of mistreatment. "I have made no accusation." "Then perhaps Lady Tamsin should be taken somewhere private, not by force." The words ended the matter. Tamsin shifted closer to Fenella. As she did, something small slipped from the loose edge of her sleeve and fell between them. It made almost no sound upon the carpet. Fenella saw only a faded violet pressed flat against a narrow square of cream paper. Tamsin looked down and made a frightened movement toward it. Aylmer reached the card first. He bent, picked it up by one corner and examined the flower. Its petals were dry but intact, mounted with 2 fine stitches. Fenella recognized the exercise. 3 weeks earlier, each pupil had been permitted to choose a flower and mount it upon a scrap of unused paper. Tamsin had selected a sweet violet and kept her work instead of adding it to the class display. "That is Lady Tamsin's," Fenella said. "She made it during a botanical lesson." Deborah exhaled with visible relief. "Then it is merely a child's keepsake." Aylmer turned the card over. The paper was not blank. Blue ruling crossed the reverse. A red margin ran along one torn edge. In a compact clerk's hand were the words, "Lady T.S. West Closet. Silent insolence. Supper withheld." Tamsin's fingers closed painfully around Fenella's. The Duke read the notation twice. No anger appeared upon his face. The absence of it was more alarming than fury. Reuben Quenby, the school bursar, was not present in the exhibition room. Yet Deborah looked toward the door leading to the administrative passage before she looked at Aylmer. He saw that too. "This came from the classroom scrap basket?" he asked Fenella. "The blank side did," she replied. "I had not seen the writing on the reverse. Who cut the scraps?" "They were delivered already cut. I do not know by whom." She would not fill ignorance with suspicion, not even now. Aylmer's eyes held hers. Something in his expression changed, not into warmth, but into recognition. She had been given the opportunity to accuse the school and had refused to claim what she could not prove. Deborah stepped closer. "Your Grace, disciplinary notations are easily misunderstood when separated from context. If the card was taken from waste paper, the words may refer to any number of routine matters." She extended her hand. "Allow me to dispose of it properly." Aylmer folded his fingers around the card. "No." The single word stopped her. He placed the pressed violet carefully inside the breast pocket of his dark coat. Tamsin watched until it disappeared, then looked up at him for the first time that morning. He did not tell her everything was well. He did not ask her to explain. He turned to the assembled guests. "The exhibition is concluded." One patroness began to protest that her carriage had been ordered for noon. Aylmer did not raise his voice. Now, chairs moved. Silk whispered. The pupils were led away under the startled eyes of their teachers. Deborah remained near the pianoforte, her dignity held together by practice. Fenella stayed kneeling until Tamsin chose to loosen her grip. The child did not. Aylmer looked down at his daughter, then at Fenella. "Please remain with her." It was a request, not an order. Fenella inclined her head. "For as long as she wishes." Deborah drew herself upright. "Your Grace, I must insist that school records remain under school authority." Aylmer faced her. "Then you will have no difficulty producing them." "Which records?" He placed one hand over the pocket containing the violet card, the correction register from which that paper was torn. Deborah's silence lasted only a second, but it was long enough. Aylmer saw it. Fenella saw it. Tamsin lowered her face against Fenella's shoulder without releasing her hand. The Duke's voice became softer still. "Where," he asked, "is the register?" "The correction register is being reviewed by the bursar." "Your Grace," Deborah said. Her answer came too quickly. Aylmer did not move his hand from the breast pocket where the pressed violet card rested. Around them, the exhibition room was emptying beneath the pressure of his command. Patronesses gathered gloves and reticules with offended whispers. Teachers led pupils through the side doors. No one looked directly at Tamsin, though nearly everyone looked at Fenella. The child still held Fenella's forefinger and leaned against her shoulder. "Then summon the bursar," Aylmer said. Deborah's expression remained composed. "Mr. Quenby is occupied with the quarterly accounts. He is occupied with a question concerning my daughter. The accounts concern every family in this institution. Then he will understand the value of accuracy." Deborah glanced toward the administrative passage. A junior teacher hurried away. Fenella rose only when Tamsin allowed it, keeping her movements slow enough that the child did not have to choose between releasing her and being pulled upright. Aylmer noticed. He noticed everything now. The room had changed for him in less than 5 minutes. Foxcombe's polished order no longer appeared reassuring. It appeared arranged. Reuben Quenby entered carrying a leather ledger case beneath one arm. He was a broad, carefully dressed man whose courtesy looked practiced rather than natural. His gaze went first to Deborah, then to Aylmer's coat pocket. "Your Grace," he said, bowing, "I understand there has been some confusion over a discarded paper. There has been a lie about where my daughter was kept and whether she was fed." Reuben's eyes sharpened. "That is a grave interpretation of a fragment without context. Where is the register?" "Sent to Bristol yesterday." Deborah looked at him. The movement was slight, but Fenella saw it. They had not prepared the same answer. Aylmer saw it too. "To whom?" he asked Mr. Pritchard, our outside accounting clerk. "For what purpose?" "Quarterly balancing." The quarter has not ended. Reuben smiled with controlled patience. Foxcombe prefers to keep its books ahead of schedule. By which carrier was it sent? The smile held, but only just. I would need the dispatch book. Fetch it. The porter keeps it. Fetch the porter. Reuben shifted the ledger case beneath his arm. Your Grace, there is no reason to turn an unfortunate classroom scrap into an accusation against the school's entire administration. You have already turned a simple question into 3 missing documents and 2 absent men. Deborah stepped nearer. Lady Tamsin is listening. Fenella felt the child's fingers tighten again. Yes, Fenella said, she is. Deborah's gaze cut toward her. Aylmer looked down at his daughter and seemed to understand the warning. Every adult defense spoken in front of Tamsin was another demand that she choose between her own fear and the authority of those denying it. The remaining discussion will occur elsewhere, he said. Mrs. Quenby, Mr. Quenby, you will join me in the drawing room. He turned to Fenella. Will Lady Tamsin come if you remain with her? Fenella did not answer for the child. Lady Tamsin, would you prefer to stay here, or would you come with me to a quieter room? Tamsin looked at the doorway, then toward the drawing room passage. Her face closed. Fenella changed the question. Would you like to leave the school? The child looked at Aylmer for the first time since he had pocketed the card. Then she looked back at Fenella and gave one small nod. Deborah inhaled. Your Grace, removing her in this condition will reinforce the very behavior we are trying to correct. Aylmer's gaze hardened. You continue to call fear behavior because the word is convenient. We have 7 months of observation. Miss Penrose has 1 dramatic morning. Miss Penrose has shown greater restraint in 1 morning than this institution has shown in 7 months. Reuben stepped between them with the smoothness of a man accustomed to redirecting conflict toward paper. If your Grace permits, I could examine the card and determine whether it belongs to any active ledger. He extended his hand. You will not touch it, Aylmer said. Reuben let his hand fall. The refusal stripped the exchange of politeness. Then I cannot assist. You can assist by producing the register, the dispatch book, the porter, and the schedules for disciplinary charges and extraordinary supervision. Reuben's face altered at the final words. The change lasted less than a heartbeat, but it was the first honest reaction Fenella had seen from him. Those accounts are unrelated. That will be determined by Mr. Hales. Your solicitor has no authority over school property. He has authority over House Staverton's subscription and every guinea associated with my daughter's care. Deborah's voice cooled. You would endanger the education of deserving girls over a misunderstanding. I will suspend every payment until I know what Foxcombe has charged families to conceal. Aylmer turned toward the secretary who had remained near the wall, pale and uncertain. Send word to Mr. Hales in Bath. He is to meet me at Whichcombe Park tomorrow morning and begin with the school accounts. Reuben gripped the edge of his ledger case. Fenella understood then that the card had frightened him, but the accounts frightened him more. Deborah changed her ground. Lady Tamsin cannot simply be taken without proper arrangements. Her belongings must be packed. Her removal must be entered. And Miss Penrose has duties here. Miss Penrose is not the question, Reuben said, too quickly. She is if Lady Tamsin will not leave without her, Aylmer replied. He looked at Fenella. Will you accompany my daughter to Whichcombe Park? The offer carried safety, wages, and danger in equal measure. Every person in the room knew how society would describe an impoverished unmarried woman who followed a duke home under unusual circumstances. Fenella did not release Tamsin's hand. "Under what position?" she asked. Aylmer seemed surprised, as her temporary companion. "With written terms." Deborah gave a faint, incredulous laugh. "Miss Penrose, this is hardly the moment to negotiate your advancement." Fenella met her gaze. "It is precisely the moment to prevent others from naming it afterward." She turned back to Aylmer. "I will accompany Lady Tamsin if the appointment is written before we depart. It must state my wages, the temporary nature of the position, my right to give independent testimony regarding Foxcombe, and my right to leave Witchcombe Park without forfeiting wages already earned." Reuben stared at her. Deborah's contempt sharpened. Aylmer listened without interruption. "Anything else?" he asked. "Suitable female supervision within the household. I will not enter a ducal residence on private assurances alone. Mrs. Dawlish is my housekeeper. She will oversee every arrangement. Then her name should appear in the appointment. It will. And no statement made by me concerning Foxcombe is to be treated as House Staverton property." A pause followed, not because the demand was unreasonable, but because no one in the room expected a drawing mistress to understand how easily patronage could become ownership. "Agreed," Aylmer said. He ordered the school secretary to bring paper. The man sat at a side desk and wrote, while Fenella dictated the necessary terms in plain language. Aylmer corrected only the salary, raising it above what she had named. Fenella lowered it to a respectable temporary rate. "I will not have payment used as proof that I was purchased," she said. His eyes met hers. "Nor will I have poverty used to diminish the value of your work. Then state the rate and let it stand without generosity." Something almost like respect moved across his face. "Very well." When the document was complete, Fenella read every line before signing. Aylmer signed beneath her. The secretary and Deborah's assistant witnessed it. Deborah did not. "You understand," she said, "that no reputable school will employ you after this display." Fenella folded her copy of the appointment. A reference is not worth having if it must be purchased with silence. Deborah's smile disappeared. Tamsin's trunk would follow later. For the journey, a maid brought the child's blue traveling cloak. Fenella held it open, but waited until Tamsin stepped into it. Aylmer observed that too. At the front steps, Reuben made one final attempt. "The school may withhold Miss Penrose's outstanding wages until missing property is accounted for." Aylmer stopped. "You will provide a written statement of every sum owed to her and every item you claim is missing. Mr. Hales will compare both against your books." Reuben's hand tightened around the ledger case. "You cannot threaten us into surrendering confidential records." "I am not threatening you." Aylmer looked back at the polished brass plate beside the door. "I am withdrawing the protection my confidence gave you." The carriage waited at the curb. Fenella helped Tamsin settle first, then stepped inside without accepting Aylmer's hand. He did not seem offended. He entered opposite them and left space between his daughter and himself. The carriage moved through Bath toward the Wiltshire road. For several minutes, only the wheels and Tamsin's breathing broke the silence. Then Aylmer looked at Fenella. "Are you afraid of me?" She could have offered the polite answer. Instead, she said, "I'm afraid of people who are believed without being questioned, Your Grace." His gaze held hers. "Then question me." "I intend to." Aylmer inclined his head as though she had given the only answer he would trust. Beside Fenella, Tamsin lifted one finger to the misted carriage glass. She drew 4 narrow lines, a square, no handle, no opening. This time she added nothing else. Neither Fenella nor Aylmer asked what it meant. The carriage continued toward Whitcombe Park, while the empty shape remained between them. Whitcombe Park appeared at the end of a long beech avenue, just as the last light withdrew from the Wiltshire fields. The carriage had taken nearly 3 hours from Bath, and Lady Tamsin had spoken no more than the square she left upon the misted glass. By the time the wheels slowed beneath the portico, the shape had faded, but Fenella still remembered its 4 narrow walls and the absence of any handle. A silver-haired housekeeper waited beneath the lamps, with 2 maids standing several steps behind her. "Mrs. Dawlish," Aylmer said as he descended. "Lady Tamsin is not to be questioned tonight." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Dawlish looked first at Tamsin, then at Fenella. Her manner held neither curiosity nor false warmth. "Miss Penrose, the terms of your appointment reached us from the last posting house. Your chamber is beside the schoolroom, with Mrs. Bell lodged in the adjoining room. You will receive the household's respect according to your position." The exactness of the welcome mattered more than kindness would have. Fenella inclined her head. "Thank you, Mrs. Dawlish." Tamsin would not release her hand on the steps. Aylmer saw it, but he did not command the child to come to him. He walked beside them through the entrance hall, matching his pace to his daughter's. The house was vast without being gaudy, its stone passages lit by lamps that threw quiet circles across portraits, carved doors, and dark polished floors. Fenella noticed almost none of it. Tamsin's grip tightened whenever a servant moved too quickly. Mrs. Dawlish led them not to the formal dining room, but to a small morning room where a tray had been arranged beneath shaded lamps. Aylmer removed his travelling coat and laid it over the back of a chair. The pressed violet card remained inside the breast pocket. Fenella knew because his hand rested over that place before he let the coat go. Tamsin sat between Fenella and the empty chair reserved for her father. At first she did not eat. Then Aylmer joined them and served her without comment. She took 1 bite of bread, then another. The pace quickened until she was swallowing before she had properly chewed. Aylmer's hand stopped beside the water glass. Tamsin reached for a second piece, tore it in half, and slipped 1 portion into her sleeve. The movement was small, swift, and practiced. "Tamsin," Aylmer said. The child froze. He had not raised his voice, but command entered it before tenderness could. Her shoulders drew inward. Fenella looked at him. "Your Grace, may I?" For 1 instant, pride crossed his face. Then he leaned back. "Yes." Fenella turned to Tamsin. "You may keep it." The child did not move. "No one will take food from you here. Still, you don't have to believe that tonight." Fenella placed another piece of bread beneath a small silver cover and set it on the side table. "This will remain until morning. If you wake and want it, it will be there." Tamsin's fingers stayed hidden in her sleeve. Aylmer looked at the covered plate, then at his daughter. A brief, naked pain entered his face. "It will remain," he said. Mrs. Dawlish came later to remove the tray. Aylmer stopped her before she touched the covered plate. "Leave that, please." "Yes, Your Grace." Tamsin did not look at him, but the tension in her mouth eased by a fraction. When Mrs. Dawlish took the child upstairs, Fenella followed as far as the bedchamber door. Tamsin stood near the bed, still holding the hidden bread. Fenella did not ask for it. She waited until the child chose to climb beneath the covers, then placed the covered plate upon a low table where it could be seen from the pillow. Aylmer remained in the passage. His figure filled the narrow space, yet he kept several feet between himself and the open door. "Should I stay?" he asked. Fenella looked at him. It was the first question he had asked her that contained no assumption of command. Stay only if she can choose whether you remain. His gaze shifted toward the bedchamber. How? Stand where she can see you. Tell her you will leave if she wishes. Then do what she asks, even if she does not use words. He absorbed the instruction without offense. Aylmer stepped to the threshold, but did not cross it. Tamsin, I can remain outside the door until you sleep. If you want me to go, turn your face toward the wall. The child watched him. After several seconds, she remained facing the doorway. Aylmer settled into a chair in the passage. Fenella moved aside, but he looked up before she left. You believe I should have known. The question was spoken too softly for Tamsin to hear. Fenella did not pretend confusion. I believe a father should know more than a school's reports. His expression tightened, and yet you did not tell her that. Would it help her to carry your guilt? No. Then it does not belong in her bedchamber. He held her gaze. The reproof was real, but so was the mercy inside it. You do not excuse me. No. But you will not use her fear to punish me. No. Something shifted between them. It was not forgiveness and not affection, but recognition. Aylmer inclined his head. Good night, Miss Penrose. Good night, Your Grace. The next morning, Fenella found both pieces of bread resting beneath the silver cover. Tamsin had removed the portion from her sleeve and placed it beside the untouched piece on the plate. Fenella offered no praise that might turn survival into performance. Would you prefer milk or chocolate? She asked. Tamsin pointed to the milk. During breakfast, she reached for a pencil from the schoolroom table. Sunlight fell across her right hand, revealing small abrasions and thickened skin along the first 2 fingers. Aylmer entered as she changed her grip. What happened to your hand? Tamsin withdrew it beneath the table. Fenella waited until Aylmer looked at her rather than pressing the child. What have you observed? He asked. Small abrasions and calluses, Fenella said. They are consistent with repeated writing or copying. I cannot tell you who required it or how often. She did not have them when she left home. Then Foxcombe may be able to explain them. Tamsin pressed the pencil too hard against the page. Fenella placed a softer one beside her without taking away the first. You may choose whichever is kinder to your fingers. After a moment, Tamsin selected the softer pencil. Aylmer watched, but asked nothing more. Before noon, Mr. Hales arrived from Bath, carrying a locked dispatch case. He was a spare, grey-haired man whose calm manner suggested long familiarity with the damage respectable people could hide inside proper documents. They met in the Duke's study with Mrs. Dawlish present at Fenella's request, and the door left open toward the schoolroom, where Tamsin sat drawing. Aylmer removed the pressed violet card from his coat. It had not left his possession since the exhibition. The violet remained dry and intact. Mr. Hales examined both sides without touching the petals. Who has held this since it fell? He asked. Lady Tamsin possessed it first, Fenella said. His Grace picked it up. Mrs. Quenby and Mr. Quenby saw it, but did not touch it. I saw the writing after His Grace turned it over. Aylmer looked at her, then at Mr. Hales. Record it exactly. Mr. Hales placed the card inside a clean envelope. Fenella signed a brief statement describing where it had fallen and what she had witnessed. Mrs. Dawlish signed as witness to the transfer. Aylmer pressed his seal across the flap. Only then did he hand the envelope to Mr. Hales, who placed it inside the dispatch case and turned the key. It remains in my custody from this moment, he said. A footman entered with a letter bearing the Foxcombe seal. Aylmer read it once and passed it to Mr. Hales. They claim Lady Tamsin has been disturbed by her removal and that Miss Penrose may be coaching her conduct. Fenella felt the familiar chill of accusation. Aylmer reached for a pen. "What do you intend to say?" she asked. "That no representative of Foxcombe will see my daughter without my permission, and mine while I remain under written appointment." His pen stopped. He looked at her. The old instinct to decide alone appeared, then receded. "Yes," he said, "and yours." He wrote the sentence exactly. When the letter had been sealed, a faint scratching sound came from the schoolroom. They turned. Tamsin had drawn the square again upon a sheet of paper. 4 walls, no handle. This time, at the lowest corner, she added a short barred mark near the floor. Beside it, she pressed a violet-colored dot so hard that the pencil nearly tore the paper. No one named what it meant. Mr. Hales studied the drawing from the doorway, then opened a memorandum from his pocket. "Mr. Pritchard exists," he said, "but he has received no correction register. There is no audit appointment, no carrier receipt, and no record of any dispatch to Bristol." Aylmer looked from the barred mark in Tamsin's drawing to the locked case holding the violet card. Then the register never left Foxcombe. Fenella watched Tamsin darken the violet dot until the paper bent beneath her hand. "No," she said, "and someone there is very afraid we will learn where it was kept." On the morning of the 17th of April, Foxcombe House Seminary received the Duke of Whichcombe by appointment and presented itself as if order alone could disprove fear. The brass plate beside the front door had been polished. The entrance hall smelled of beeswax and fresh soap. No pupils crossed the passage, and no servant spoke above a whisper. Fenella entered behind Aylmer with Mr. Hales and Lady Prudence Marlowe, one of the school's senior patronesses. Tamsin had remained at Whichcombe Park under Mrs. Dawlish's care. Before the carriage departed, the child had watched from an upper window, with one hand resting against the glass, but she had not drawn the closed square again. Deborah Quenby received the visitors in the drawing-room. A silver tea service waited beside a display of testimonials praising Foxcombe's moral discipline, maternal oversight, and refinement of difficult temperaments. Reuben stood near the mantel with a closed ledger beneath one hand. "Your Grace," Deborah said, "I'm grateful you have returned under calmer circumstances." Aylmer remained standing. Mr. Pritchard never received the correction register. Reuben's fingers tightened over the ledger. "There appears to have been an error in the dispatch arrangements." "There was no dispatch," Mr. Hales said. "No carrier receipt, no audit appointment, no entry in the porter's book." Deborah folded her hands. "Then the register remains somewhere within the school offices and will be produced when the accounts are properly reviewed." "Produce it now," Aylmer said. "The correction books contain private references to other young ladies," Reuben replied. "They cannot be opened merely because one family has misunderstood a notation. My daughter was named upon that notation." "Initialed," Reuben corrected, "not named. Do not mistake precision for innocence." Aylmer's gaze moved toward the administrative passage. Fenella saw the impulse before he took a step. His power could open doors, but not without giving the Quenbys a different argument to hide behind. "Your Grace," she said quietly. He looked at her. "If you enter without the proprietor's consent, they will speak of trespass instead of the register." Reuben's mouth almost curved. Aylmer noticed. He did not reward it. "Mr. Hales," he said, "prepare notice requiring the preservation of every correction register, dispatch book, pupil letter, disciplinary schedule, and account of extraordinary supervision." Mr. Hales opened his case. The sealed envelope containing the pressed violet card remained locked inside. He withdrew only blank legal paper. I will list the records precisely. Deborah's composure cooled. You are assuming concealment. I am preventing it. A young maid entered carrying fresh water for the tea. Her cap was pinned tightly beneath her chin, and both hands were reddened from work. She kept her eyes down until Mr. Hales spoke the words West Closet, while reading back the proposed notice. The tray struck the edge of the table. A spoon fell onto the carpet. The maid Deborah rose at once. Mary is careless when nervous. You may go. Aylmer turned. Mary. The girl stopped. Do you know where the West Closet is? She looked first at Deborah, then at Reuben. Her fear sharpened when she met the bursar's eyes. Your Grace, Fenella said, not here. She knows something. Perhaps. But she is standing before the people who control her wages, her lodging, and the reference she will need when she leaves. Aylmer's jaw tightened. And if she goes now, then she may still choose to speak when choice is possible. The room held still around them. Aylmer stepped aside. You may go, Mary. The maid retrieved the spoon with trembling fingers and left. Reuben's expression had changed. Fenella could not yet name what Mary knew, but she knew whom the girl feared most. Deborah resumed her seat. Miss Penrose has always shown an unfortunate tendency to interpret discipline through the lives of servants. She opened a leather folder and removed a folded letter bearing an old seal. Fenella recognized it before the paper was fully opened. 8 years had passed, but the sight of it still produced the same cold pressure beneath her ribs. Deborah read with careful regret. Miss Fenella Penrose was dismissed from a respectable Surrey household after displaying unreliable judgment, improper interference, and a tendency to invent cruelty where ordinary correction was intended. Lady Prudence turned toward Fenella. Reuben watched Aylmer instead. That was the purpose of the reference, not to explain Fenella's past, but to change the value of anything she said in the present. Is the document genuine? Aylmer asked. The paper and signature are genuine, Fenella replied. The account is incomplete. Reuben gave a short breath of disbelief. Convenient. Aylmer's gaze moved to him. You will address Miss Penrose with civility. I am observing that she has made similar claims before. No, Fenella said. You are hoping repetition will look like proof. Deborah laid the reference beside the tea tray, then explain what happened. Fenella looked at the hostile room, the witnesses selected by rank, and the old accusation placed before her like a trap. Not in this manner. Deborah lifted her brows. Your credibility is surely relevant. Then examine it properly. Protect the servant's name. Notify the household accused. Permit witnesses to answer without losing their livelihood. I will not purchase my own defense by turning another woman's humiliation into a drawing-room performance. Lady Prudence lowered her eyes for a moment, but not before Fenella saw approval there. Aylmer did not conceal his. Miss Penrose has made fewer claims than anyone in this room, he said. She has refused to say who wrote the notation, who ordered the copying, or what the drawing means because she lacks proof. You, Mrs. Quenby, called confinement an exaggeration. Mr. Quenby claimed a register had gone to Bristol when it had not. Those are not comparable failures of judgment. Reuben stepped to the side table and moved his ledger away from Mr. Hales. The cover opened briefly as he did. Fenella saw columns ruled in red. Beside several pupil initials appeared small recurring charges. Special supervision, restricted table, private correction. Reuben closed the book too quickly. Aylmer followed Fenella's gaze. That ledger, he said. It contains fee schedules, Reuben replied. Then it falls within the preservation notice. It contains confidential family accounts. Preserve it. Do not surrender it today. The distinction deprived Reuben of the right to call the act seizure. Mr. Hales completed the notice and placed it on the table. Retreat must be witnessed. Lady Prudence stepped forward. I will witness it as patroness. Deborah looked at her. Prudence, surely you do not intend to lend your name to an attack upon the school. I intend to lend it to the preservation of records. Aylmer approached the subscription ledger displayed beneath the testimonials. House Staverton's contribution is suspended from this hour. Deborah's restraint finally cracked. That money supports girls whose families cannot meet the full fees. Then the proprietors may explain why their education depends upon my ignorance. He signed the notice suspending payment and requiring preservation of all disciplinary accounts. Reuben looked not at the signature, but at the line naming extraordinary charges. Fenella saw fear there again. They left Foxcombe without entering the offices. Only after the carriage had cleared Bath and turned onto the Wiltshire road did Aylmer speak. Mr. Hales and Lady Prudence travelled behind them, leaving Fenella opposite the Duke beneath the dark leather roof. "Why did you not tell me about the dismissal?" he asked. "You did not ask. I asked whether you feared me. That was not the same question." The carriage rocked over a rut. Aylmer steadied himself with one hand against the seat. "You knew they might use the reference. Anything may be used against a woman without rank if the room already prefers the person accusing her. You could have warned me." Fenella met his eyes. "As your employee, as someone whose judgment I have relied upon." "Reliance is not equality." He went still. She continued before caution could soften the truth. "You asked whether I feared you because you wished to know how your power affected me. You did not ask who I was before I entered your carriage." The answer might have offended a different man. Aylmer looked out at the wet hedgerows, then back at her. "Then I asked poorly." "Yes, Your Grace. If I ask properly now, will you tell me?" Fenella studied him. No impatience appeared in his face. "When Lady Tamsin is not waiting at home to learn whether we found the register. You think the answer would burden her. I think she has carried enough adult failure." Aylmer inclined his head. "Then I will wait." The acceptance unsettled Fenella more than argument would have done. He had not apologized to win her confidence. He had merely recognized that he had not yet earned it. They reached Wychcombe Park after dusk. A school trunk stood beneath the entrance lamps with its lock intact. Mrs. Dawlish waited beside it and held a lamp near the inner edge of the lid. "Your Grace," she said, "the trunk was delivered less than an hour ago. Nothing has been removed since it entered this house." Along the dark lining ran a narrow row of pale stitches. The thread was new. Fenella touched nothing. Aylmer looked at the seam, then at Mrs. Dawlish. "No one opens it tonight." His gaze moved to Fenella. "Tomorrow, we inventory every object before witnesses." Beneath the lamplight, one corner of the fresh stitching pulled slightly away from the wood, as though something flat had been hidden behind it. The trunk was opened the next morning in the Wychcombe schoolroom, where clear daylight fell across the lid and every object could be seen before it was touched. Mrs. Dawlish stood beside the writing table with an inventory sheet. Aylmer remained near the hearth. Fenella sat beside Lady Tamsin, who had refused to begin breakfast until the trunk was brought upstairs. The child watched the pale row of new stitches around the lining without blinking. "The lock was intact when the trunk arrived," Mrs. Dawlish said. "The footman who received it has signed to that effect." Aylmer looked at Fenella. Proceed as you judge proper. She heard the difference in those words. He did not tell her what must be done. He gave her judgment room to exist. Fenella began with the visible contents: 2 winter dresses, 3 pairs of stockings, a French grammar, a prayer book with the flyleaf removed, a packet of pencils worn nearly to the wood, no letters. Each item was named, recorded, and placed upon a separate table before the next was lifted. Tamsin's gaze did not leave the lower left corner of the lining. Fenella noticed only after the trunk was empty. She kept her hands away from the seam. "Lady Tamsin," she said, "do you know why this was sewn?" The child did not answer, her eyes fixed upon the same corner. "You don't have to speak. You may point if you wish." Tamsin raised 2 sore fingers and touched the place. Aylmer took 1 step forward, then stopped before his nearness became another pressure. "May we open it?" he asked. Tamsin looked at Fenella. Fenella waited. At last the child nodded once. Mrs. Dawlish brought embroidery scissors. Fenella showed both witnesses where she intended to place the blades, then cut 3 stitches. The thread loosened with a faint snap. Tamsin flinched. Fenella paused at once. "Shall I stop?" The child shook her head. Fenella opened only enough of the lining to reach beneath it. Her fingers found paper, 2 sheets. She withdrew them together and laid them flat before anyone touched them. The first was a sealed letter addressed in Aylmer's hand to Lady Tamsin Staverton at Foxcombe House Seminary. Red wax remained unbroken. Across the front in pencil, someone had written, "Not to be given after defiance." The second paper was smaller, folded twice, with 1 word written on the outside in Tamsin's uneven hand: "Papa." Aylmer went utterly still. Fenella did not open either document. "Lady Tamsin," she said, "would you like your father to see these?" Tamsin's lower lip trembled. She nodded. Fenella lifted the sealed letter and held it toward Aylmer. His hand closed around one edge as her fingers released the other. Their gloves brushed. The contact lasted no more than a breath, yet both drew back as if the brief warmth had crossed a boundary neither had permission to name. Aylmer looked at Fenella. Anger stood plainly in his face, but beneath it lay shame and fear. She held his gaze long enough for him to understand that she saw both, then turned back to Tamsin. Aylmer broke the seal before the 2 witnesses. The letter was dated 3 months earlier. He read it once in silence. Then, because Tamsin had moved closer, he read it aloud. "My dearest Tamsin, I hope the frost has lifted in Bath and that you are permitted to walk in the garden. Mrs. Quenby writes that you have chosen not to answer my last letter, but I will continue to write until you wish to answer. I have sent the violet-colored pencils you liked. Your room remains as you left it. I remain always your affectionate father." The paper shook once in his hand, only once. "They told me you did not want my letters," he said. Tamsin stared at the folded note still lying on the table. Fenella placed it before her. "Would you like to open this one yourself?" Tamsin tried, but the fold resisted her injured fingers. Fenella loosened the edge, then let the child finish. Inside, the message held 1 line. "Papa, I am trying to be good enough to come home." Aylmer sat down. Mrs. Dawlish lowered her eyes, granting him what privacy a room with witnesses could allow. Tamsin remained beside the table, not crying, not reaching, her small face emptied by the old expectation that love could be withdrawn for failure. Aylmer did not seize her or force an embrace. "You were always good enough to come home," he said. His voice broke on the final word. Tamsin placed her unsent note beside his unopened letter and carefully aligned their edges. 2 messages, both stopped, both made to resemble silence. Fenella felt anger rise through her, cold and exact. The school reports said Lady Tamsin preferred not to receive family correspondence. Aylmer crossed to a cabinet and removed the copies Mr. Hales had sent from Bath before dawn. Mrs. Dawlish read the dates aloud, while Fenella compared the wording. Lady Tamsin prefers quiet. Lady Tamsin has chosen not to receive letters. Lady Tamsin responds poorly to indulgence from home. The handwriting differed from report to report, but the sentences returned almost unchanged. Fenella looked more closely. This phrasing is arranged like an accounts template. Aylmer turned toward her. Explain. Each report changes the day and the surface detail, but the central language repeats in the same order. It reads as though one person supplied the form and others copied around it. He glanced at the papers. Reuben Quenby. Possibly, Fenella said. Not proved. Even now, especially now. He looked at her sharply, then lowered his eyes to the documents. She had been given every reason to accuse. Yet she refused to borrow certainty from anger. By afternoon, Tamsin had fallen asleep in the adjoining room with the door left open. Mrs. Dawlish sat near the window, preserving propriety, while Fenella and Aylmer remained at the schoolroom table. The suppressed letter and Tamsin's note had been placed in separate, clean folders. Nothing would leave the room until Mr. Hales returned to witness the transfer. Aylmer rested both hands against the back of a chair. Yesterday, I asked why you had not told me about your dismissal. Yes, I am asking now, properly. Fenella folded her hands in her lap. The old accusation had already entered Foxcombe's defense. Silence would not protect her from it. 8 years ago, I was employed by a family in Surrey. Their eldest son accused a maid of stealing a silver button from his coat. I had seen him tear it away himself after losing a wager. The maid would not contradict him. She feared dismissal. You spoke for her. I told the truth about what I had seen, and the family asked you to withdraw it. They called it confusion first, then imagination. When I refused to retract the statement, they dismissed me. The maid was sent away soon after. Aylmer's expression hardened. What became of her? I don't know. Fenella looked toward Tamsin's open door. That is the part I have never forgiven myself for. You were not the one who dismissed her. No, I was merely the one who believed truth alone would protect her. The sentence settled between them. Aylmer did not offer an easy consolation. That is why you keep dates, witnesses, exact words, and distinctions. A woman without rank is often told that memory is emotion once her account becomes inconvenient. And you expected the same from me. I did not know what to expect from you. He accepted that without protest. Then he looked toward his daughter's room. I sent Tamsin to Foxcombe because I did not know how to reach her after her mother died. 2 governess arrangements failed. Questions made her retreat further. I told myself a school offered companionship, discipline, and expertise. His fingers tightened against the chair. The truth is that her silence made me feel powerless. Fenella said nothing. He forced himself to continue, and ashamed. I chose a place where other people would name the silence for me. No excuse followed. That mattered more than any apology would have. You cannot undo sending her there, Fenella said. I know, but you can stop requiring her to prove fear before you believe she felt it. Aylmer met her eyes. I will. A footman appeared at the open door, carrying a formal envelope, sealed with the mark of the Foxcombe proprietors. Mrs. Dawlish received it and brought it to Aylmer. He broke the seal, read, and passed the notice to Fenella. She was required to appear in Bath and answer an accusation of removing institutional property from Foxcombe House Seminary. The exact item was not named. The omission was deliberate. Aylmer's face closed into readiness. "Mr. Hales can answer for you." Fenella folded the notice once. "No, they intend to destroy your credibility. Then they will hear my answer in my own voice." She looked toward the two hidden letters that had taught a father and daughter to mistake love for abandonment. "But I will not answer alone, and I will not answer in silence." For 3 days, Fenella wrote down everything she could prove and struck through everything she merely suspected. She worked at the schoolroom table on the 22nd of April, while Lady Tamsin drew beside her with the softer pencils. Mrs. Dawlish had placed in a fresh box. The child's fingers were healing, though she still changed her grip whenever pressure reached the tender skin. Fenella began with dates. 14 April. The spring exhibition. Tamsin's refusal to recite. The touch upon her shoulder. The way she crossed the room and reached for Fenella. The pressed violet card falling from her sleeve. Aylmer reading the words upon the reverse. She recorded who had been present and who had handled the card. She wrote that Tamsin later drew a square without a handle, and then a low barred mark beside a violet-colored dot. She did not call the square the West Closet. She did not call the barred mark a vent. She knew neither fact. Whenever anger tempted her to write cruelty where she possessed only evidence of fear, she stopped and began the sentence again. Aylmer watched from the open doorway. "Mr. Hales can present the chronology," he said. Fenella sanded the final line before looking up. "Why?" "Because the proprietors will question him differently." "That is precisely why I must speak." He entered the room. Tamsin glanced at him, then returned to shading the veins of a leaf. "The accusation concerns school property," Aylmer said. "Deborah will use your dismissal in Surrey. Reuben will argue that your appointment at Whitcombe gives you a financial motive." "I know." "Then allow Hales to carry the argument. A woman who is called dishonest and then remains silent does not appear protected. She appears unable to answer." His expression tightened. "I am trying to spare you humiliation. You cannot spare me by removing my voice." Tamsin's pencil slowed. Fenella lowered her tone, "And no junior servant is to be named in the meeting unless her lodging and wages are protected first. Mary may know what happened in the West Closet. Then she must be asked when Deborah and Reuben are not standing within reach of her future. What if she refuses later? Then refusal must remain hers." Aylmer looked toward his daughter. Tamsin had drawn 2 stems rising from one root, one straight, and one bent toward the light. "Very well," he said. "You will speak. Mr. Hales will advise the proprietors and keep the minutes within their stated purpose. Not a word beyond what I can prove." "Agreed." That afternoon, Mr. Hales returned to Whitcombe Park. Before Fenella and Mrs. Dawlish, Aylmer transferred the suppressed letter and Tamsin's unsent note into the solicitor's care. Each was placed in a separate paper folder described by date and condition, then locked inside a compartment of the dispatch case. The pressed violet card remained sealed in its original envelope in another compartment. Nothing changed hands without being witnessed. When the work was complete, Aylmer found Fenella alone, for a moment beside the schoolroom door, while Mrs. Dawlish helped Tamsin choose a cloak for the next morning. "At Bath," he said, "would you prefer me beside you or behind you?" Fenella studied him. Several days earlier, he would have decided where protection required him to stand. Now he asked. "Beside me," she said. His eyes held hers. "For today," she added. The limitation did not offend him. For today. On the 24th April, the proprietors of Foxcombe House Seminary assembled in a private committee room above a Bath subscription library. The gathering was not a court. Though the polished table and ranked chairs encouraged several people to behave as if judgment already belonged to them, Deborah sat between two proprietors, with Lady Prudence Marlowe at the opposite end. Reuben occupied a chair near the clerk and carried the same leather portfolio Fenella had seen at Foxcombe. Mr. Hales placed his locked dispatch case beside his own seat and kept the key in his waistcoat pocket. Aylmer was offered the largest chair. He moved it back until it stood level with Fenella's. No one commented, but Fenella saw Deborah notice. The clerk began with identification. Miss Fenella Penrose, formerly drawing mistress at Foxcombe House Seminary? Yes. Presently employed in the household of His Grace, the Duke of Whichcombe? Reuben asked before the clerk could continue. Mr. Hales turned toward him. The clerk is establishing identity, Mr. Quenby. Fenella answered anyway. I hold a written temporary appointment with stated wages, independent testimony rights, and freedom to leave without forfeiting payment already earned. Deborah folded her hands. An unusually careful arrangement secured on the very day Lady Tamsin refused to leave without you. The arrangement was careful because my position had already been made vulnerable by your decision to interfere with school discipline, by the discovery of a notation concerning a child's confinement and withheld supper. One proprietor lifted a hand. Miss Penrose, restrict yourself to what you personally witnessed. That is what I intend to do. She opened her chronology. Her voice remained steady as she described the botanical lesson held 3 weeks before the exhibition. Each pupil had selected a flower and mounted it upon paper taken from a classroom scrap basket. Fenella had seen only the blank side of Tamsin's scrap. She did not know who had cut the paper or delivered it to the basket. She then described the exhibition. Tamsin's breathing, the child's recoil when Deborah touched her shoulder, and the card falling after Tamsin reached for her. She did not state who wrote the notation. She did not claim that the square Tamsin drew was a particular room. She recorded only that the child had repeated the drawing and added a low barred mark beside a violet-colored dot. Deborah listened with an expression of sorrowful patience. You speak tenderly of Lady Tamsin. She is 8 years old and deeply attached to you. She sought me when she was frightened, because you encouraged dependence. I did not touch her until she chose to take my hand. Reuben leaned forward. Is it not true that Lady Tamsin's attachment elevated you from an obscure drawing mistress to a salaried place at Whichcombe Park? Aylmer's shoulders went still. Fenella answered before he could speak. It placed me in a room where adults are weighing a child's fear against their own reputations. That is not an answer. Then ask the question plainly. Reuben's color rose. Do you expect the Duke of Whichcombe to marry you because you have made his daughter dependent upon your presence? The insult landed with enough force to expose its purpose. One proprietor looked down. Lady Prudence's mouth tightened. Aylmer rose. That subject is outside the inquiry. His voice was quiet, but the clerk's pen stopped at once. Any further speculation concerning marriage, courtship, or Miss Penrose's private ambitions will be omitted from the minutes. Reuben spread his hands. Motive is relevant. Then ask about conduct, payment, access, or evidence. You will not turn my daughter's distress into a vulgar accusation against a woman who helped her breathe. Fenella looked at Aylmer. He had drawn the boundary she had requested. He had not answered for her. Your Grace, she said, allow me to respond. After one taut moment, he sat. Fenella faced Reuben. Dependence created by fear is not a triumph. If Lady Tamsin needs my presence because someone taught her that food, letters, or kindness may be withdrawn, then my purpose is not to make that need permanent. It is to help make it unnecessary." No one interrupted. She continued. "If I wished to rise, why would I choose the testimony most certain to ruin my employment?" Deborah's fingers tightened. "You speak as though ruin has already been threatened. You told me before witnesses that no reputable school would employ me again because you abandoned your duties. I left under a written appointment after the Duke requested records you would not produce." Lady Prudence turned to the clerk. "Enter that distinction." The pen resumed its scratching. Reuben opened his portfolio. The committee need not rely upon speculation regarding Miss Penrose's motives. He withdrew a sealed letter and placed it at the center of the table. Fenella saw her own name upon the outer fold. The handwriting resembled hers closely enough to stop her breath. Deborah watched her reaction with the stillness of someone who had been waiting for it. "This letter," Reuben said, "was sent to a Bath newspaper editor. It offers private particulars concerning a duke's afflicted daughter in exchange for payment. Mr. Hales did not reach for it. Identify its source before the seal is broken." Reuben rested one finger beside Fenella's copied name. "Tomorrow," he said, "the letter will identify itself." On the morning of the 25th April, the sealed letter lay at the center of the committee table, while every person in the room pretended not to watch Fenella breathe. She had spent the night beneath Lady Prudence Marlowe's roof in Bath. Aylmer had lodged elsewhere, preserving the distance propriety required, and the inquiry had already begun to create. They had not spoken since leaving the subscription library the previous afternoon. Now he sat 2 chairs away, close enough for Fenella to see the weariness beneath his eyes, and far enough that the space between them seemed deliberate. Mr. Hales examined the outer fold without touching the seal. Delivered to the office of the Bath Chronicle on the 20th April, he read from the editor's accompanying note. Returned yesterday after the editor declined to publish material concerning a child. Reuben inclined his head as though the editor's decency had somehow entered the room through him. The editor recognized the impropriety of Miss Penrose's proposal. "He recognized the proposal was improper," Fenella said. "That doesn't establish who wrote it." Deborah lowered her gaze with careful sorrow. "You haven't yet heard the contents. Neither have you, if the seal is intact." The answer stopped Deborah for half a second. Mr. Hales noticed. So did Aylmer. Reuben recovered first. "My sister was informed of the nature of the offer by the editor's clerk." "Then the clerk must be identified," Mr. Hales said, "and his account must be entered separately." One of the proprietors shifted with impatience. "Must every obvious fact be surrounded by ceremony?" Fenella looked at him. "When a woman's livelihood depends upon it, yes." Mr. Hales recorded the remark, then broke the seal before the clerk, Lady Prudence, and both proprietors. He unfolded the letter. Fenella saw her name at the bottom before she saw anything else. The handwriting was close enough to hers that a colder fear entered her than simple accusation. The long descenders were shaped as she shaped them. The capital P in Penrose leaned forward. Even the pressure weakened near the end of each line, as though the writer had studied not only her hand, but the fatigue in it. Mr. Hales read aloud. The letter offered exclusive particulars concerning a duke's afflicted daughter, including the curious flower card by which the child's treatment might be made sensational. In exchange, the writer requested payment sufficient to secure independent lodgings once, her temporary employment at Whichcombe Park had served its purpose. The final paragraph promised additional details if the editor would meet privately and guarantee discretion. Silence followed. Not the attentive silence of the day before. This silence had already begun deciding what kind of woman Fenella was. A patroness who had greeted her politely upon entering now drew her reticule closer and shifted her chair several inches away. The clerk, who had called her Miss Penrose the previous afternoon, asked in a colder voice whether she wished to deny the signature. The humiliation was small enough to pass as manners. That made it worse. "I deny writing the letter," Fenella said. Reuben rested one hand beside the page. "The resemblance is remarkable. So is the convenience." Deborah folded her hands. "Miss Penrose, no one wishes to condemn you unfairly." Fenella looked at the empty space where the patroness's chair had been. "Then begin by not moving before the proof does." Lady Prudence's mouth tightened. Aylmer did not look at the patroness. His gaze remained on the letter. "May Miss Penrose examine it?" he asked. Reuben's hand covered the lower corner. "She may attempt to damage the evidence." Aylmer's voice went quiet. "Remove your hand." Reuben obeyed. Mr. Hales lifted the sheet between two clean blotting papers and held it where Fenella could study it without taking possession. She forced herself to ignore the imitation of her hand and looked instead at what the writer could not imitate so easily. "The paper isn't mine," she said. "How can you know that?" Deborah asked. "My stationery is cream-laid and bears a small bell watermark. This sheet appears white. The mark may be elsewhere. Then hold it to the window." Mr. Hales did so. Near the lower fold, a faint fox's head appeared above two crossed branches. Reuben's expression did not change, but the muscle beside his mouth tightened. Fenella had seen the same mark on school notices. "That watermark belongs to Foxcombe paper," she said. "Foxcombe purchases from several suppliers," Reuben replied. "You had access to school stationery. So did every person in the accounts office." She leaned nearer. "The delivery source remains unidentified. The editor's note doesn't state who brought the envelope. And the wording about my temporary employment repeats language used when my appointment was written." One proprietor frowned. "Does that not suggest you wrote it?" "It suggests the writer knew the terms." Fenella looked at Reuben. "I'm not the only person who heard them." Deborah opened the leather folder containing Fenella's old Surrey reference. "There is also a pattern of conduct." She read the accusation aloud again. "Unreliable judgment, improper interference, a tendency to invent cruelty, a habit of encouraging servants to challenge proper authority." The words had not changed in 8 years. Only the room had. Miss Penrose divided one household before, Deborah said. Now she has divided another. Fenella felt every eye turn toward Aylmer. She kept her own attention on Deborah. "You've omitted that the accusation concerned a maid blamed by the heir of the household. Because the family found your account unsupported. Because the maid couldn't contradict the son without losing her livelihood." Reuben tapped one finger against the table. "And now you profit from another vulnerable girl." Aylmer rose. "Enough." The clerk's pen stopped. Aylmer looked toward the proprietors, not Fenella. "This letter will not be declared authentic today." Deborah lifted her brows. "Your Grace, the handwriting is nearly exact. The paper bears the school's watermark. The person who delivered it hasn't been identified. The editor's clerk hasn't been questioned. The wording was known to several people. Resemblance isn't proof." Relief moved through Fenella so quickly that it nearly weakened her knees. Then Aylmer continued. The accusation will remain open until those matters are examined. Open, not rejected, not believed false, suspended above her. Mr. Hales requested that the letter be placed in his custody. The proprietors agreed. He folded it between protective sheets, placed it inside a separate evidence packet, and marked the date and witnesses across the flap. Before the packet closed, Aylmer looked once more at the phrase temporary employment at Witchcombe Park had served its purpose. Fenella saw the change in his face. That wording had come from the appointment dictated at Foxcombe. Only the people in that room had heard it. Aylmer knew that. So did she. "Do you believe me?" she asked. The question stripped the room of procedure. It left only the man and the woman who had begun, against caution, to trust one another. Aylmer looked at her. For one moment, she saw the father who had waited outside Tamsin's bedchamber and admitted shame. Then the Duke returned. "I believe the evidence is insufficient." The answer was measured. It was legally careful. It was not the answer she had asked for. Fenella held his gaze until he understood the difference. "I won't beg a duke to believe me because he has seen me behave kindly," she said. "Kindness isn't proof of innocence, but doubt isn't neutral when only one person in the room can survive it." Deborah shifted in her chair. Fenella turned back to the proprietors. "Enter the accusation exactly as made. Enter my denial exactly as given. And place Mrs. Quenby's signature beneath the statement that I sought payment for details concerning Lady Tamsin." Deborah's composure faltered. "That's unnecessary." "Then withdraw the charge." She did not. The clerk passed the page. Deborah signed. By noon, the inquiry ended without judgment. When Fenella stepped into the street, 2 women outside the subscription library stopped speaking at the sight of her. One turned away. News had already outrun the evidence. The journey back to Wiltshire began beneath a low grey sky. Mr. Hales and Lady Prudence followed in another carriage. Fenella sat opposite Aylmer, as she had on the first journey from Foxcombe, but the space between them no longer felt chosen. For nearly an hour, neither spoke. Rain began against the carriage roof. At last Aylmer removed his gloves, folded them once, and placed them beside him. "Until the letter is verified," he said, "you must not be alone with Tamsin." Fenella looked at him. "You're removing me from her care, temporarily, because the accusation may be true, because the inquiry must remain beyond any claim that her conduct was influenced. It was already beyond that claim when I refused to speak for her. Reuben will say otherwise. Then you are giving his accusation a visible consequence." His hand tightened against the edge of the seat. "I won't risk my daughter, and I won't pretend this is protection." Fenella. It was the first time he had spoken her given name. The intimacy of it arrived at the exact moment trust failed. She felt the wound of that more sharply than anger. "Don't use tenderness to make suspicion easier for me to accept." He went still. "That wasn't my intention." "I know." She turned toward the rain-streaked window. "Intentions haven't protected any of us." The carriage continued through the wet Wiltshire road while Witchcombe Park waited ahead, no longer a refuge, but a house in which Fenella's every act of care would now be watched as though kindness itself had become evidence against her. By the time the carriage reached Witchcombe Park on the evening of the 25th April, Fenella had already decided that she would not remain in a house where suspicion had been given the shape of protection. The decision did not make the entrance easier. Lamps burned beneath the portico. Mrs. Dawlish waited near the foot of the staircase, and somewhere above them a door opened before a maid quietly redirected Lady Tamsin toward the schoolroom. Aylmer heard the quick footsteps. His face tightened, but he did not call his daughter down. Mr. Hales arrived moments later in the second carriage with Lady Prudence. The solicitor carried his locked dispatch case, which still held the sealed pressed violet card, the suppressed letter, Tamsin's unsent note, and the separately sealed forged newspaper letter. Fenella noticed because exactness was the only kind of safety left to her. "We will speak in the study," Aylmer said. Mrs. Dawlish remained near the open door. Mr. Hales stood beside the dispatch case. Aylmer did not sit behind his desk. "The restriction is temporary," he began. "You will continue to receive your salary. Your room will remain yours. You may consult Mr. Hales and continue your chronology. But I may not be alone with Lady Tamsin, not until the letter is verified. Then the accusation has already changed my position." Aylmer pressed one hand against the back of a chair. "I am preventing Reuben Quenby from claiming that her behavior has been influenced. He made that claim before the letter was opened, and he will make it again. So you have decided to give it evidence." His gaze sharpened. "That is not what I am doing. You are separating a child from the person she trusts because a man who lied about a register has accused that person of dishonesty. I cannot ignore a letter in your hand that contains wording from your appointment. You are not required to ignore it. You are required to investigate it without punishing me first." His composure thinned. "My daughter's safety must come before your pride." Silence followed. The words struck him almost as quickly as they struck Fenella, but regret did not erase them. "My pride," she repeated. "That was unfair. So is suspicion, Your Grace. Yet only one of us is expected to live beneath it." Mrs. Dawlish lowered her eyes. Mr. Hales remained still. Aylmer stepped closer, then stopped several feet away, preserving the distance he had only recently learned to respect. "What would you have me do?" "Believe that caution applied only to the powerless is not caution. I cannot give you certainty before the evidence is tested. I did not ask for certainty. I asked whether you believed me." His face changed. The question from Bath had returned, and he still had no different answer. Fenella felt the pain of that more deeply because she knew he wanted to be better than his fear. Wanting was not enough. "You may remain here without being treated as guilty," he said. "You cannot promise that while treating me as a risk." "Fenella." He used her name more carefully this time, but the intimacy still belonged to a trust he had not protected. "Do not make tenderness another reason I must accept doubt." He went still. "That was not my intention. I know." Her voice softened despite herself. "Intentions have not protected any of us." Aylmer looked toward the open door as though he might see Tamsin beyond it. "You mean to leave? Tomorrow morning, you would abandon your appointment?" "I will complete the chronology. I will surrender the schoolroom key. I will accept only the wages I have earned. I will not remain where every act of care must be supervised, as though kindness were evidence of wrongdoing." He did not command her to stay. That restraint came too late, but it still mattered. "Very well," he said at last. "The carriage will be prepared." The next morning, the 26th of April, Fenella completed the final page of her chronology in the schoolroom. She recorded the Bath proceedings, the forged letter, its Foxcombe watermark, the unidentified delivery source, and Aylmer's restriction. She made his decision neither kinder nor harsher than it had been. When the ink dried, she tied the pages with plain tape, sealed the packet, and wrote across the flap that it had been completed before her departure from Witchcombe Park. Mr. Hales signed the transfer and locked it inside a separate compartment of his dispatch case. Fenella then removed the temporary schoolroom key from her reticule. For one brief moment, it rested in her palm. The key had opened no private chamber and granted no social belonging. Yet surrendering it still felt like placing down the work through which Tamsin had first trusted her. She closed her fingers once, then opened them and placed the key directly into Mrs. Dawlish's hand before Mr. Hales and Aylmer. From this moment I retain no access to the schoolroom. Mrs. Dawlish closed her fingers around it. Witnessed. On the table lay Fenella's account sheet, the exact wages earned, and a second purse. For unforeseen expenses, Aylmer said. No, you may need time before securing another place. Then I will need that time in my own name. It is not charity. Foxcombe will call it payment for silence by noon. He flinched. I would never ask that of you. Then do not give them the shape of it. She accepted only the wages stated in her appointment. They entered the hall together. Tamsin was already waiting at the bottom of the staircase in a pale morning dress, a slate held against her chest. No one had summoned her. The moment she saw Fenella's travelling cloak, the slate slipped from her hands. She ran forward and reached with both arms. Fenella caught her hands but did not promise what she could not control. I'm going to Bath. Tamsin shook her head fiercely. Your father and I must decide whether trust means the same thing to us. The child looked toward Aylmer. Fenella kept her voice gentle. What happened at Foxcombe isn't your fault. What happens between your father and me isn't your burden. Aylmer bent to retrieve the slate, but did not touch Tamsin. Miss Penrose is leaving by her own choice, he said. Because I made a decision that hurt her. Tamsin stared at him. The truth did not comfort her, but it did not make her carry a lie. Fenella squeezed the child's hands once, then released them before either of them could turn separation into possession. At the carriage, Aylmer did not offer his hand. He understood that even formal touch would ask for a closeness she could not give. The carriage left Whitcombe shortly after 9 and reached Bath in the early afternoon. Fenella spent that night under Lady Prudence's roof, then moved on the 27th of April to respectable lodgings in a narrow street near the parish church. A circular from Foxcombe had already arrived at 2 local schools. It stated that Miss Fenella Penrose had been removed from a ducal household pending grave concerns regarding her conduct. Fenella read it once, folded it, and entered the date in her notebook. At Whitcombe, Tamsin stood between Aylmer and Mrs. Dawlish after the carriage disappeared beyond the beeches. She lifted the slate and wrote 4 words. Papa sent safe away. On the morning of the 28th of April, a woman in a worn grey shawl came to Fenella's lodgings carrying a note from a parish visitor. She had once taken laundry from Foxcombe. Fenella showed her the copied drawing of Tamsin Square, with the barred mark low in one corner and the violet-coloured dot beside it. The woman's face changed. That's the west closet, she whispered. Her finger hovered over the barred mark. And that's the old linen vent near the floor. Fenella looked up. Where does it lead? Into the vault beneath. The woman swallowed. That's where Mr. Quenby kept the brown registers before they went out at quarter's end. Fenella looked again at the little violet dot Tamsin had pressed beside the vent. The child had not drawn the place where the records were hidden. She had drawn the room where she had been afraid, and without knowing it, she had marked the opening that led directly to the truth. The former laundress remained in Fenella's lodgings until every detail had been written twice, once in Fenella's notebook, and once in a separate statement that did not yet bear the woman's name. Morning light from the 28th of April fell across the copied drawing of the west closet. 4 narrow walls. No handle, a barred mark near the floor, a violet-colored dot beside it. The closet sits above the old linen vault, the woman said. That mark is the vent. It was meant to carry air upward when the room below was damp. Fenella kept her pen still until the woman finished. Could a child inside the closet see it clearly? Yes, it's low in the wall, behind the old laundry press. The bars are iron. A small child sitting on the floor would see little else. And the vault below. Mr. Quenby kept brown registers there, correction books, account schedules, old correspondence. They were moved to Bristol at quarter's end, when the school books were sent for balancing. Not in the middle of April, never while I worked there. The woman rubbed one thumb over the other. The trunks were heavy. He complained whenever they had to be moved before the carter came. Fenella wrote the answer exactly. How did register paper reach the classroom scrap basket? Damaged account leaves were cut down for notes and practice work. If a page had only one entry, the written corner might be torn away and the rest sent upstairs. Sometimes the cuts were careless. That explained the card without making Tamsin a thief or Fenella a liar. The child had chosen what appeared to be blank waste. The evidence had found her because the school's economies were as careless as its cruelty. Will you repeat this before witnesses? Fenella asked. Fear entered the woman's face at once. Mrs. Quenby will say I stole linen. Mr. Quenby will have me turned from my room. Who controls your room? The parish lets it through a widow's fund. My washing comes from 2 houses connected to Foxcombe patronesses. Fenella closed the notebook. Then your name will not be used until your lodging, parish relief, and work are protected. Can the Duke promise that? A duke may promise many things. I will ask what can be secured without depending upon his promise alone. Fenella wrote 2 notices that afternoon. The first went to the legal proprietor of the Foxcombe building, stating that records connected to an active inquiry might be removed from a vault upon his premises. The second went to Mr. Hales, identifying the witness only as a former employee, and requesting written protection before disclosure. She sealed the notices separately and sent them by different parish messengers. No servant from Whichcombe carried either one. On the 29th of April, Mr. Hales arrived at the lodgings, with Lady Prudence's written undertaking that the laundress would receive temporary rooms, uninterrupted parish assistance, and replacement washing work if Foxcombe retaliated. Aylmer entered behind him. Rain had darkened one shoulder of his coat. He stopped several feet from Fenella, while her landlady remained beside the open door. Mr. Hales placed his locked dispatch case upon a side table. The pressed violet card remained sealed in its original envelope within it. The forged newspaper letter, suppressed letter, Tamsin's unsent note, and Fenella's chronology remained separately secured. The building proprietor will permit an inventory, Mr. Hales said, only of trunks, ledgers, or papers being removed from the premises. He will not authorize a general search. That is sufficient, Fenella replied. If the records remain below, the preservation notice stands. If they are moved, the movement can be witnessed. He has also agreed that no trunk leaves the yard until its contents are listed. Fenella nodded. Aylmer had not spoken. She could feel the restraint in him, not as distance forced upon her, but as an effort not to place his apology where she could not refuse to hear it. Before we discuss Foxcombe, he said at last, I owe you the truth. Fenella looked at him. You owe me an apology. Yes, He accepted the correction without defense. I called my decision caution. It was fear. I feared being deceived again about Tamsin, and I made you carry the cost. Rain tapped steadily against the window. I removed you from her care while claiming I had not judged you. That was a judgment. Fenella did not rescue him from the silence that followed. Yes, she said, I isolated the person under suspicion because it was easier than standing beside uncertainty. His voice lowered. I am sorry. There was no request attached. No assurance that he had acted as any father would. No attempt to make remorse equal repair. Fenella studied his face and saw that he had come before the new evidence was found, before innocence could make apology safe for him. I believe you are sorry. Something eased in his expression, but she continued. I do not yet know whether I can trust what you will do when the next accusation arrives, dressed as respectability. Then don't trust the apology. He held her gaze. Watch what follows it. That will take time. I know. Fenella placed her notebook upon the table between them. Aylmer looked at it but did not reach. May I read only what you permit? He asked. The question carried more intimacy than touch would have. She pushed the notebook toward him by several inches. Begin with the dates. He rested 2 fingers against the outer edge. Careful not to cover her writing, Fenella explained the west closet, the low vent, the linen vault beneath, and the quarter schedule. Aylmer listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked what part she wished him to take. None that belongs to me, she said. The proprietor authorizes the inventory. Mr. Hales records it. Lady Prudence protects the witness. You may stand beside me and ensure no one uses rank to frighten the staff into silence. Agreed. At 6:30 on the morning of the firm May, they assembled in the yard behind Foxcombe House. The building proprietor stood with Mr. Hales, Lady Prudence, and 2 local tradesmen who had agreed to witness the inventory. Fenella remained outside the gate until the clerk entered her name and purpose into the written minutes. Aylmer stood beside her, neither before nor behind. The school cart waited near the service passage with 3 dark trunks already loaded. Reuben Quenby gripped the rail while the porter secured a leather strap. His face altered when he saw the witnesses. These are ordinary quarter papers, he said. The quarter has not ended, Fenella replied. The proprietor has authorized an inventory, Mr. Hales said. Nothing will be seized merely because it is listed. Deborah appeared on the rear steps in a dark morning gown. You have no right to expose private family records. Then the names will be covered where possible, Lady Prudence said. But the trunks will be opened. Reuben looked toward Aylmer. Your Grace, this is an abuse of influence. Aylmer did not answer for Fenella or Mr. Hales. The authority is the proprietor's, he said. The witnesses are independent. Proceed. The first trunk contained household receipts, fee books, and schedules of small repeated charges. Special supervision, restricted table, corrective copying, correspondence management. The second trunk held bundles of family letters, many unopened, addressed to pupils in the hands of mothers, fathers, sisters, and guardians. One packet bore House Staverton's seal. Aylmer went rigid, but he did not reach for it. Mr. Hales listed the bundle and retained it with the rest. The third trunk was heavier. Beneath 2 account ledgers lay a brown-bound register with a red label and 1 corner torn. No one spoke. Mr. Hales named the book, the trunk, the witnesses, and the hour before lifting it. He opened to a page marked with pupil initials, West Closet. Supper withheld. Corrective copying. At the bottom of one entry appeared Lady T.S. Aylmer's face, emptied of everything but restraint. Fenella looked at the torn corner. It appeared consistent with the shape recorded from the violet card. But the original remained sealed in Mr. Hale's dispatch case and would not be opened in the schoolyard. This proves the register never went to Bristol, Aylmer said, and that the card came from it. Reuben replied quickly, proves only that Miss Penrose had access to school waste. No, Fenella said. It proves the school lied about the register. The rest still requires evidence. Reuben stared at her, almost unsettled by the fairness he had tried to destroy. Mr. Hales reached deeper into the trunk and withdrew a wrapped packet of unused stationery. He held the top sheet toward the morning light. A fox's head appeared above two crossed branches, the same watermark as the forged newspaper letter. Beneath the paper lay a fee schedule in Reuben's hand, with the word receive misspelled exactly as it had been in the accusation against Fenella. By the 2nd of May, the forged letter had begun to lose the false certainty that made it dangerous. Mr. Hales kept it sealed, except when opened before witnesses, and each examination added another fact that did not belong to Fenella. The stationer in Bath identified the fox head watermark as belonging to a batch of paper supplied to Foxcombe's accounts office. He would not claim that the ink itself proved authorship, only that the same blue-black ink appeared on invoices signed by Reuben Quenby. A delivery boy, questioned under Lady Prudence's protection, identified the school porter as the man who had given him the envelope. The porter, spoken to separately, and promised wages owed if Foxcombe's dismissed him, admitted that Reuben had ordered the letter sent through an errand boy rather than the school's usual messenger. Reuben had also possessed years of Fenella's handwriting in lesson schedules, pupil corrections, and employment records. The copied hand was clever. The habits beneath it were not. The forged letter misspelled receive as receive. The same error found in Reuben's fee schedules, dispatch memoranda, and 3 notices concerning extraordinary charges. On the 4th of May, the Foxcombe proprietors gathered again in the private committee room above the subscription library. Mr. Hales placed the forged letter beside Reuben's notices and the stationer's statement. No single fact settles authorship, he said. Taken together, the paper, access, delivery path, copied wording, and repeated spelling habit establish that Miss Penrose did not write this letter, and that it originated within the bursar's office. Reuben was absent, claiming illness. Deborah sat rigidly at the end of the table. You are treating coincidence as proof, because His Grace demands a convenient conclusion. Aylmer did not answer first. Fenella did. His Grace did not find the stationer, question the boy, or identify the porter. The evidence did. Deborah looked at her with open dislike. You speak confidently now that a duke stands behind you. He stood behind doubt first. The words struck Aylmer, but Fenella did not soften them. One proprietor cleared his throat. The committee is prepared to withdraw the accusation. Withdrawal is not enough, Fenella said. The accusation was carried beyond this room. Deborah folded her hands. A public correction would expose Lady Tamsin to more gossip. Then omit her details. State only that the letter attributed to me was false, that it arose from Foxcombe materials, and that I was not dismissed from Witchcombe Park for misconduct. The same patroness who had moved her chair away from Fenella on the 25th of April sat near the clerk. Her eyes remained lowered. Fenella looked at her. You believed the accusation quickly enough to change where you sat. The woman flushed. Miss Penrose, I regret that. Then let regret travel as far as suspicion did. Silence followed. Mr. Hales drafted the correction in plain language. The accusation, circulated against Miss Fenella Penrose, was false and unsupported. The disputed letter had originated from materials and staff connected to Foxcombe House Seminary. Miss Penrose had not been removed from Whitcombe Park for misconduct and had left by her own decision. Each proprietor signed. Lady Prudence signed as independent patroness. At Aylmer's request, the woman who had moved her chair signed beneath them. Deborah refused. Her refusal was entered in the minutes. Aylmer then ordered copies sent to every school, patroness, and subscriber who had received the original circular. House Staverton will bear the cost, he said. Fenella turned toward him. No language of protection. He understood at once. No, the correction will state that Miss Penrose required it in her own right. That distinction mattered. It kept the truth from becoming another gift bestowed by rank. Outside the committee room, Aylmer asked whether Fenella would return to Whitcombe Park that afternoon. Tamsin misses you, he said. I know. She asks after you without using words. That cannot become an argument. His face tightened. I did not mean it as one. Then do not ask me to return because she suffers in my absence. That would make her pain the instrument of your wish. Aylmer accepted the rebuke. May I call upon you tomorrow with Mrs. Dawlish? Formally, in daylight, yes. And if Tamsin wishes to see you, Fenella looked at him. I will visit her for 1 hour as a guest. No key, no appointment, and no assumption that affection restores trust. Agreed. The following afternoon, the 5th of May, Fenella entered Whitcombe Park through the front door as a visitor. Mrs. Dawlish received her in the hall. No servant called her governess. No schoolroom key was returned. No room had been prepared. Those omissions were not coldness. They were respect. Tamsin waited in the schoolroom with a flat portfolio tied in blue ribbon upon her lap. She stood when Fenella entered, but did not run. Her healing fingers rested lightly against the ribbon. For a moment, she looked toward Aylmer, who remained near the window. He nodded once, confirming that nothing had been promised on her behalf. Tamsin crossed the room and placed the portfolio into Fenella's hands. Inside was a botanical drawing of 2 open hands connected by the stem of a violet plant. There was no square, no barred mark, no closed corner. It's beautiful, Fenella said. Tamsin watched her face, then sat between Fenella and Aylmer at the table. She chose a pencil. Aylmer chose another. Fenella took none until Tamsin placed one beside her. They drew in silence. The hour did not begin with questions. That was its first kindness. After several minutes, Tamsin turned her slate over and wrote carefully. Papa believes now. Did he believe late? Aylmer read the words. Pain moved across his face, but he did not ask Fenella to answer for him. Yes, he said, I believed late. Tamsin looked at him. I waited for proof that Miss Penrose would never use your fear for gain, though she had already shown me who she was. I called that caution. It was fear. The child's gaze moved to Fenella. Fenella did not rescue him from the truth. He believes the evidence now, she said. He is learning that power does not make waiting harmless. Aylmer accepted the words. Tamsin erased the slate and returned to her drawing. She did not reach for Fenella's hand. She did not need to. The absence of dependence felt more hopeful than any clinging would have done. When Mrs. Dawlish took Tamsin to the window seat to sort pressed leaves, Aylmer remained beside the schoolroom table. Sunlight fell across the empty place where Fenella's temporary key had once rested. I did not only miss your presence, he said. I missed the way you made it impossible for me to remain comfortable inside my own excuses. Fenella looked at him. That is not a tender confession. No, His mouth tightened faintly. "But it is an honest one." The room seemed smaller than it was. They stood close enough for her to see that he had slept badly again, yet he did not step nearer. "May I take your hand for one moment?" he asked. The question was quiet and complete. It contained no presumption that exoneration had restored what suspicion broke. Fenella looked toward Tamsin, who was occupied with Mrs. Dawlish across the room, then back at Aylmer. "You may." He extended his hand, palm upward. Fenella placed her gloved fingers in his. The touch was deliberate, unlike the brief accident over Tamsin's hidden letter. His hand closed gently, not enough to hold her if she chose to withdraw. For one measured breath, neither spoke. The warmth of him reached her through the thin kid leather. It did not erase Bath. It did not excuse the carriage ride or the supervised restriction. It acknowledged that trust might return by consent, one moment at a time. Aylmer released her first. "Thank you," he said. Fenella drew her hand back. "Do not thank me as though one moment settles anything. I won't." Mrs. Dawlish entered from the adjoining table, carrying a sealed packet delivered from Foxcombe. Deborah had circulated copies of the original enrollment agreement signed in September 1855. Mr. Hales arrived before the packet was opened and examined the seal. Aylmer broke it in the presence of Fenella and Mrs. Dawlish. The clause was genuine. His own signature appeared beneath language authorizing seclusion, reduced table privileges, and corrective copying when deemed necessary for moral discipline. Aylmer read the words twice. The color left his face. Fenella looked from the signature to the man who had just asked permission before touching her hand. The forged letter had been disproved. The school had now produced something far more dangerous. A document that did not imitate the Duke's name, because the Duke himself had signed it. On the 6th of May, Mr. Hales placed the enrollment agreement beside the recovered correction register in the Duke's study and asked Aylmer to identify the signature without looking away from it. "It is mine," Aylmer said. The words sounded harder than denial would have. Fenella stood near the open door, with Mrs. Dawlish seated within sight, while Tamsin remained upstairs by her own choice. The child had been told only that her father was examining papers she had signed before she entered Foxcombe. She had not been asked to hear adults debate what those papers had permitted. Mr. Hales read the clause again. Seclusion, reduced table privileges, corrective copying, moral discipline. "The language is broad," he said. "It does not authorize locked confinement, deprivation of ordinary meals, interference with family correspondence, or copying sufficient to injure a child's hand." Aylmer did not take comfort from the distinction, but it gave them cover. It gave them ambiguity, Fenella said. They supplied the cruelty. He looked at her, and I supplied the signature. No one answered. That afternoon, the fee books recovered from the trunks were compared with kitchen and postage records. The pattern appeared quickly once someone stopped treating each small charge as harmless. Families had paid for special supervision. Restricted table, corrective copying, and correspondence management. The kitchen accounts showed no additional provisions for children, supposedly requiring special meals. The postage books showed no forwarding of the letters. Foxcombe claimed to have managed. Punishment had not merely enforced obedience, it had produced income. Aylmer turned page after page without speaking. Reuben's misspelled receive appeared beside repeated sums. Some girls had been charged more often after family visits. Others were billed after letters arrived. He monetized isolation, Mr. Hales said. Fenella looked toward the window. The sentence was accurate, but its neatness made her uneasy. He made fear profitable, she said. On the 7th of May, 2 fathers wrote requesting a private settlement. One offered to withdraw his daughter quietly if her initials never appeared in any account of Foxcombe. Another proposed that Deborah resign for reasons of health while Reuben's fraud was handled separately. Neither letter denied what had happened. Both asked that respectability survive it. Aylmer read them in the long gallery while Fenella walked beside him, and Mrs. Dawlish remained at the far end. If Foxcombe closes, he said, if the girls are transferred, if the Quenbys lose their positions, and if Reuben is sent before the proper authorities, what does a public hearing add? A record that does not depend upon private memory. It also adds Tamsin's name to gossip. Her name is already in the school's defense. Not before every subscriber in Bath. His restraint was fraying. Fenella could hear it beneath the careful words. Men will say I signed what I did not read. Women will call her delicate. They will ask whether grief made her unmanageable. Some will. You say that as though it costs nothing. I say it because pretending otherwise will not protect her. Aylmer stopped near the window. Rain silvered the lawns beyond the glass. You ask me to choose public truth over my daughter's peace. No, I ask you to stop treating secrecy as peace. He looked at her. Fenella continued before the old instinct to soften rank could return. Tamsin does not have to speak. She does not have to describe one punishment. She does not have to sit in the room. The adults created records. Let the records bear the burden. And if Deborah uses my signature to say every parent consented, then your signature must be shown first. His face changed. First, before the forged letter, before the accounts, before the servants. Let every person in that room understand that power failed before corruption exploited it. Aylmer looked away. The silence stretched long enough for Fenella to hear the faint ticking of the gallery clock. You would have me accuse myself. I would have you tell the truth before asking anyone else to do it. He turned back to her. And if that truth harms Tamsin, then protect her identity where possible. Use initials for the other girls. Do not call her as a witness. Do not ask her to perform recovery for an audience. But do not leave Deborah free to reopen elsewhere beneath a new name and a fresh set of testimonials. Aylmer's jaw tightened. You believe she would. I believe respectable cruelty survives by changing addresses. He said nothing. Fenella felt the emotional distance between them narrow and resist narrowing at the same time. She loved the man who had asked permission before taking her hand. She distrusted the Duke, who still imagined he might choose how much truth others were allowed to bear. Both men stood before her in the same body. I can love a man who was wrong, she said. The words entered the gallery more quietly than she expected. Aylmer went still. Fenella did not retreat from them. I cannot love one who uses power to avoid admitting it. For one moment, his face held no title, no practiced restraint, only the wound of a possibility he had not known she carried. He did not move toward her. He did not reach for the hand she had once permitted him to hold. Then, I will not ask love to excuse me, he said. Let them hear where I failed before they hear where I acted. Fenella's breath caught, but she gave him no reward beyond the truth of her presence. She remained beside him. On the 8th May, Lady Prudence secured the Bath subscription room for a proprietor's hearing. Mr. Hales drafted the order of evidence. The pressed violet card would remain sealed until opened before witnesses. The correction register, withheld letters, forged newspaper letter, fee books, kitchen accounts, and postage records would follow. The former laundress would testify only after her lodging and work protections were confirmed in writing. Mary would be offered temporary service in another household before being asked to speak. No child except Tamsin would be identified by name. Tamsin's name would appear only where the card and Aylmer's public responsibility made omission impossible. On the 9th of May, Reuben sent notice that if the hearing proceeded, he might publish the names of every girl whose initials appeared in the correction register. Mr. Hales added the threat to the written minutes and warned that any publication would strengthen the case for retaliation and fraud. Deborah sent a separate letter saying obedience had saved more girls from disgrace than indulgence ever would. Fenella read it once and handed it back. She believes that. Does that make her more dangerous? Aylmer asked. It makes her less likely to stop. That evening, he went to Tamsin's room. Fenella remained in the corridor, with the door open and Mrs. Dawlish nearby. Aylmer sat several feet from the bed. I signed a paper before you went to Foxcombe, he told his daughter. I thought money and a good recommendation could purchase safety. I did not ask what the words meant in practice. Tamsin watched him. That was my failure, not yours. He did not ask whether she forgave him. He did not ask her to attend the hearing. He only told her that the adults would speak and that she might remain at Whitcombe if she wished. Tamsin looked toward Fenella in the doorway, then back at her father. Slowly, she placed the pencil in her hand upon the coverlet. I want to go, she said. Aylmer's breath changed. You will not have to speak. I know. You may leave at any moment. Tamsin nodded. Fenella saw fear remain in the child's face, but choice had entered beside it. 5 days after the enrollment clause arrived, on the morning of the 10th of May, Deborah Quenby entered the Bath subscription room dressed in mourning grey. Reuben followed with a leather portfolio clutched beneath his arm. Across the green baize table lay an empty space reserved for the pressed violet card, and before either villain sat down, Aylmer placed his signed agreement beside it. Aylmer's signed agreement lay first upon the green baize table, exactly where he had placed it before the hearing began. The gesture altered the room. Before Mr. Hales opened a single case, parents, patronesses, clergymen, subscribers, former servants, and school proprietors had gathered beneath the tall windows of the Bath subscription room, prepared to hear of Foxcombe's failures. They had not expected the Duke of Whitcombe to place his own failure before them. Tamsin sat beside Mrs. Dawlish near the end of the first row. Fenella remained at the table with Lady Prudence and Mr. Hales. Deborah Quenby occupied the opposite side in mourning grey, her hands folded upon the silver head of a cane she did not require. Reuben sat beside her with his leather portfolio closed against his chest. The clerk called the meeting to order and stated that it was a proprietor's inquiry, not a criminal court. Its purpose was to determine the management of Foxcombe. The truth of accusations circulated against Fenella Penrose and the disposition of records preserved under notice. Any evidence of forgery or fraud would be sent afterward to the proper county authorities. Mr. Hales rose. Before the school's records are examined, His Grace has asked that the enrollment clause bearing his signature be entered first. Aylmer did not look away when the clerk read the language aloud. Seclusion, reduced table privileges, corrective copying, moral discipline. Deborah inclined her head. Those terms were approved by Lady Tamsin's father. They were, Aylmer said. I signed them without asking how they would be enforced. Several parents shifted in their seats. He continued before anyone could offer him the shelter of misunderstanding. The clause does not name locked confinement ordinary meals withheld, injured fingers, or intercepted letters. But its vagueness gave cruel people room to act beneath my authority. That failure is mine. No applause followed. The silence was heavier than approval would have been. Mr. Hales placed his locked dispatch case upon the table and turned the key before 6 witnesses. He withdrew the envelope sealed at Witchcombe Park on the 15th of April. Fenella's and Mrs. Dawlish's signatures remained across the flap beneath Aylmer's seal. The card was placed inside this envelope before witnesses and has remained sealed in my custody since that transfer. He cut the edge carefully and removed the pressed violet card. The petals had faded, but they remained intact. He laid it flat upon the green cloth, flower side upward. Tamsin watched without moving. Mr. Hales turned the card over. Blue ruling crossed the paper. A red margin marked the torn edge. The clerk read the notation into the minutes. Lady T.S. West Closet. Silent insolence. Supper withheld. Deborah's expression did not change. A fragment without context proves very little. Mr. Hales opened the brown correction register recovered from the trunk. Reuben had attempted to send from Foxcombe on the 1st May. He turned to the page naming Lady T.S. and brought the torn corner beside the card. Paper met paper, the fibers aligned. The room became still. The card was cut from this register, Mr. Hales said. The school represented that the book had been sent to Bristol. It had not. Reuben leaned forward. That proves a discarded page reached the classroom. It does not prove punishment was carried out. Then we continue, Fenella said. Mr. Hales presented the letters next. Unopened correspondence from parents and guardians lay in bundles, each recovered from the trunk, marked pupil correspondence. Aylmer's letter to Tamsin followed, its original seal broken at Witchcombe before witnesses. The pencil instruction remained upon the front, not to be given after defiance. Beside it lay Tamsin's unsent note. Papa, I am trying to be good enough to come home. A mother in the second row covered her mouth. Deborah looked toward her with stern impatience. Children often resist correction through sentiment. Fenella met her gaze. You told parents their daughters chose silence. You told children their families chose absence. The former laundress was called. Lady Prudence's written protection of her lodging, parish assistance, and replacement work was entered before she gave her name. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She identified the west closet from Tamsin's drawing and described the barred linen vent near the floor. The vent opens into the vault beneath, she said. Mr. Quenby kept the brown registers and old correspondence there before quarter's end. Were children kept in the vault? One proprietor asked. No, sir, in the west closet above. I heard them there, sometimes crying. Sometimes so quiet that Mrs. Quenby said the correction was working. Deborah struck the cane once against the floor. A dismissed laundress repeats kitchen gossip. I wasn't dismissed, the woman said. I left when my hands could no longer carry the wet linen. Mary entered next under Lady Prudence's temporary employment protection. She kept her eyes on the clerk. Mrs. Quenby told us not to open the west closet when a child refused supper, she said. She said, hunger made pride smaller. Deborah rose. That girl has been coached. Mary flinched, but did not withdraw her statement. Mr. Hales asked who had been present. She named a senior instructress, 2 servants, and Reuben. The names matched the duty book. The stationer followed. He confirmed that the foxhead paper used for the forged newspaper letter came from a batch sold to Foxcombe's accounts office. He made no claim that the ink alone proved anything. The school porter admitted. Reuben ordered the envelope sent through an errand boy rather than the usual messenger. The delivery boy identified the porter and the date. Mr. Hales then placed Reuben's fee notices beside the forged letter. The copied handwriting imitated Fenella's form. The misspelling beneath it did not. Receive appeared as receive in both the letter and Reuben's schedules. Reuben opened his portfolio. A clerk may have prepared those papers. Name him, Mr. Hales said. Reuben gave no answer. The fee books came last. Families had paid repeated charges for special supervision, restricted table, corrective copying, and correspondence management. The kitchen accounts showed no additional food supplied. The postage books showed no letters forwarded. One proprietor removed his spectacles. Punishment produced revenue. Reuben looked toward Deborah. She did not look back. Deborah rose with the composed dignity of a woman who believed respectability could outlive truth if she never lowered her voice. I preserved obedience. Girls of rank are not served by indulgence. Fear of consequence has saved more young women from disgrace than softness ever will. Fenella stood. She did not answer with a speech. Fear is not refinement, she said. Deborah's mouth hardened. Fenella looked toward the bundles of unopened letters. Intercepted love is not education. Tamsin rose from her chair. Mrs. Dawlish did not restrain her. Aylmer turned, but he did not summon or stop her. The child crossed the room alone. Each step was deliberate. When she reached the table, she touched one fingertip to the edge of the pressed violet card. Then she turned toward Fenella and lifted her hand. Fenella did not close the distance. She waited. Tamsin placed her fingers in Fenella's. Miss Penrose taught me the word safe. Her voice was quiet, but no one asked her to repeat it. Fenella held her hand without drawing her closer. Tamsin had chosen the room, the words, and the touch. Aylmer stood. Miss Penrose spoke the truth before I possessed the courage to trust her without complete proof, he said. When a forged accusation was placed before me, I removed her from my daughter's care while claiming I had not judged her. That caution was not neutral. It punished a woman without rank because my fear wore the appearance of prudence. He turned toward the proprietors. My title did not excuse that failure. It made the failure easier to survive. The proprietors withdrew briefly, then returned with written findings. The accusation against Fenella Penrose was declared false and unsupported. Deborah and Reuben Quenby were removed from all management of Foxcombe. The school would close while the pupils were transferred. Subscribers withdrew their patronage. Deborah's testimonials would be revoked. Former staff would receive wages owed and protected references. The forged letter, the diverted funds, and the falsified accounts would be delivered to the county solicitor for proceedings at the assizes. Reuben rose sharply. You would destroy us on the word of servants and an ambitious woman. Fenella looked at the register, the letters, and the accounts. No, you destroyed yourselves in the records you thought no one would read. The clerk entered every signature. No one applauded. The consequences required no performance. Mr. Hales returned the pressed violet card to its envelope and resealed it before witnesses. It remained in his custody. Only after the final finding had been signed did Aylmer approach Fenella. May I take you back to your Bath lodgings? He asked. Or would you prefer Lady Prudence's carriage? Fenella looked at Tamsin. I will travel with you. This is her journey home. It is not yet my answer to anything else. I understand. Tamsin fell asleep between them before the carriage had left Bath. Her hand rested open upon the seat, no longer clutching either one. Aylmer kept his voice low. When the evidence no longer requires us to meet, may I still call upon you? Fenella looked at him across the child sleeping between them. "Yes," she said. "You may ask." By March 1857, nearly 11 months had passed since the Bath hearing, and the consequences had settled into facts rather than rumour. Reuben Quenby had been convicted at the autumn assizes of forgery and fraud involving school funds. Deborah lived with distant relatives and possessed neither patronage nor testimonials enough to reopen Foxcombe under another name. The school itself had closed. Its former pupils had been placed elsewhere, and the women who had once been expected to endure quietly were now visited by a private committee led by Lady Prudence Marlowe and several experienced matrons. Fenella served as its paid secretary. The work required records, interviews, careful recommendations, and the difficult habit of believing frightened girls without making fear their only identity. She kept her own income. She chose her own lodgings in Bath. She travelled to Whitcombe only by invitation, and Aylmer called upon her through a courtship conducted in daylight, in letters, and beneath the eyes of people who respected them both. He never used Tamsin to shorten the distance between them. Tamsin, now 9, sometimes joined their walks and sometimes preferred to remain with Mrs. Dawlish. She spoke more often than she had at Foxcombe, but no one treated speech as proof of health or silence as failure. On a bright morning, late in March, Fenella met Aylmer in Lady Prudence's drawing room to discuss his proposed contribution to the visiting committee. He placed a document upon the table, but did not push it toward her. "The income is settled annually," he said. "It can support travel, temporary lodging, and wages for witnesses who lose employment." Fenella read the first page. "The fund bears the Staverton name. I thought public association might discourage interference. It might also teach every woman we help that the Duke may withdraw support when displeased." Aylmer did not defend the language. "What would you require? Independent trustees. No ducal name, no authority for you to choose visitors, approve reports, or determine which girl deserves help." "Agreed. You have not heard the final condition." "I know enough to know the principle." She looked up. "And if the committee reaches a conclusion you dislike, then I may argue as a private man and lose as one." The answer came without hesitation. Fenella studied him for a long moment. This was not the man who had once believed protection required control. He had not become smaller by surrendering authority. He had become more trustworthy. "Have the deed rewritten," she said. "I will. And the committee will accept the money only if every trustee agrees." "Of course." Aylmer gathered the pages. His hand paused near hers, but he did not touch her. Even after months of courtship, he still asked where touch mattered. Before he could speak again, Mr. Hales arrived, carrying a narrow parcel wrapped in protective paper. He placed it before Tamsin, who had entered with Mrs. Dawlish and now stood beside Fenella's chair. "The assizes have concluded," he said. "The original card may be returned to Lady Tamsin. A certified transcript will remain in the legal file. The correction register and forged letter are retained in the county archive. The family correspondence and Lady Tamsin's note are also returned." Tamsin untied the string with careful fingers. The pressed violet card lay between 2 sheets of clean paper. The flower had faded to a soft brown purple, yet its shape remained whole. She did not turn it over immediately. Instead, she looked at Fenella. "May I keep it in my botanical album?" "It belongs to you," Fenella said. Tamsin turned to Aylmer. "Not in the locked cabinet." "Not unless you choose it," he replied. Later that afternoon, she placed the card beneath protective glass on a page of cream paper. Beneath it, in her own careful hand, she wrote, "The day Papa asked the right question." Aylmer read the label without correcting it. By sunset, he and Fenella walked along the violet path at Whitcombe Park with Mrs. Dawlish and Tamsin several paces ahead. Spring had only begun to soften the borders, but small purple flowers had appeared beneath the bare branches. Aylmer stopped where the path curved away from the house. "Fenella." She turned toward him. His expression held the same restraint she had first noticed in the exhibition room, but no longer the same distance. "Before I ask anything, I want you to know what is already settled. Your income remains yours. Your work remains yours. A separate provision will be placed in your name whether you marry me or refuse me. Whitcombe will be your home only if it never becomes your cage." She watched him carefully. "You have thought about this as a duke. I have tried to think about it as a man who once mistook possession for protection." He took a slow breath. "I love you, not because Tamsin needs you, not because you repaired my house, not because you forgave what I did, because you did not forgive it cheaply. I love you because you tell the truth when silence would serve you better, because you protect dignity without making a performance of kindness, because you taught me that love cannot be proved by holding tighter." His voice lowered. "I want to marry you, but I do not want gratitude, rank, apology, or Tamsin's affection to answer for you." Fenella felt the answer rise, before fear could shape it into caution. "Then hear mine plainly. I will not marry you because you are a duke. I will not marry you because your daughter loves me. I will not marry you because you suffered enough to deserve reward." Aylmer remained still. "I will marry you because I love you, Aylmer." The sound of his name without title changed his face. Fenella extended her hand. She did not wait for him to ask first. He took it gently, and this time neither released after a single breath. His thumb rested against the seam of her glove. "May I hold you?" he asked. Fenella stepped toward him. "Yes." His arms closed around her with care, not uncertainty, and she placed her hands against his back. The embrace was quiet and complete. It held no rescue, no debt, and no claim stronger than consent. When they drew apart, Aylmer searched her face. "May I kiss you?" Fenella lifted one hand to his cheek. "You may." He bent slowly enough for her to change her mind. She did not. His lips touched hers in a gentle kiss, warm and restrained. Fenella answered it, not by remaining still, but by leaning closer and keeping her hand against his face. When the kiss ended, they remained near enough to share the same breath. "I love you," he said again. "I know," she replied, "and I love you." 4 weeks later, in late April 1857, they married in the estate chapel at Whitcombe Park. Fenella entered as Miss Penrose and left as the Duchess of Whitcombe only after the vows were spoken. Her committee salary continued. The separate settlement remained hers. No one announced that love had transformed her worth. It had merely recognized what power had once failed to see. After the ceremony, Tamsin found Fenella beneath the chapel porch and asked, "May I call you Mama one day?" Fenella knelt before her. "Only when it feels true to you." Tamsin considered this, then nodded. That evening, the three of them walked the violet path. Tamsin held one hand from each adult until she saw a flower growing near the edge of the grass. She released them both and hurried ahead to examine it. Aylmer and Fenella stopped where she had left them. Neither reached after her. Their hands remained open. After a moment, Tamsin returned by choice, placed one hand in Fenella's and the other in her father's, and began walking at her own pace.